I'm gonna say hi quick. Okay. Hi, class. Gonna try things a little differently this time and do a little bit of a video instruction and see if that works. So first, this is Adelita. Say hi, Adelita. Okay. All right, we got it. Let me go now. She's gonna leave us alone now. All right. Okay, so we're going to do one more thing in preparation for writing your reflective essays. And it's basically one of the things we're working on in the reflective essay is the dialectic. And if you remember that from that earlier reading, the dialectic means to produce knowledge via discussion or conversation. And so that's really what we're doing. It's a form of what we refer to as metacognition. Studies have shown that that's the one, the most important skill you can develop in predicting your success within academia. How well you do at this says how well you will do in your college career quite often. So it's an important skill to learn, and that's what we're practicing in this um, um, essay. So make sure you've read the assignment instructions on your syllabus. Remember to keep only 25% as the occasion, and the rest is going to be your reflection or the occasion, the thoughts and ideas about that. And it's going to lead to an interpretation of culture, and that's going to be your thesis statement. So read that assignment over again. Unfortunately for this one, I usually have readings that I have to make copies of, and I don't have access to those readings online. So I found one other reading I'm going to have you do, and I'll put that in the announcements. But I kind of like the other ones better, but we're making do. So what I want to do today, and kind of your week's assignment on the reflective essay, is to do a class discussion. We're going to do it a little bit differently, and we're going to do it in the discussion thread that follows this video. And basically, what I'm going to have you do is come up with a perspective topic for this essay. And remember, the focus needs to be interpreting culture. So if it's something you really want to argue, save that for the next essay. If it's something that you really, in other words, it should be something that allows you to question yourself as well as to question societal norms, behaviors, and values, and so on. So I'm going to suggest some topics here in a second, but a couple things. So make sure you don't have to underline your thesis in this one, but it should still have a focus. And really, what I'm looking for is your ability to do two things: to incorporate multiple perspectives without losing your focus. It's easy to maintain a focus if you've got one perspective, but if you can incorporate 10 perspectives and maintain your focus, that's some good writing. That's some good metacognition. And then the other thing about this essay is that what we do in a freshman level course is we isolate what English teachers refer to as rhetorical modes. Things like compare, contrast, cause, effect, argument, illustration, analysis, evaluation, narration. All of those are rhetorical modes. For the reflective essay, we're really trying to produce a professional idea of an essay in which all of those are on the table. And I want you to make sure you explore and you utilize more than just one or two. So make sure you use some cause and effect, as well as concept explanation, maybe a little bit of argumentation. The narration portion is sort of built in because of the occasion requirement. So you can use some narration and some description. And and well, never mind. So anyway, so that's the other thing we're working on. So I will post that article later today. So if you're looking for another example of how this might look, take a look at that article. It's called Black Men in Public Space. And I'm going to look for another one that might work for this essay as well. So you might end up with two of those, and I'll give instructions for the instructions for that will be the same, except this time have to type out your summary and responses and put them in the assignments tab. So what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do is suggest a few topics for you and say a few things about some of them. One of the topics that can be used, for example, is horror movies. So horror movies, I mean, the whole idea of being scared is usually thought of as a bad thing. Um, and yet we love horror movies. We pay $10, $20 sometimes to go into a dark movie theater or to corn maze at Halloween time or something along those lines. So that can be a topic that we might explore. What does it say about who we are as a species, and particularly who we are as a culture? Why are horror movies bigger now than they were at other times in history? And then more particularly, you might narrow that focus. Why are zombies such a big thing, right? We've got the TV show, and they're in what, season 400 or something by now, of The Walking Dead. And we've got just so many movies with the zombie theme. So we might explore that a little bit, as to why why the zombie theme in particular is so common. Some different ideas on that. So the zombies have been around for a long time in terms of Haitian culture, but why have they become a universal phenomenon? The first zombie movies were all linked to Haiti and the voodoo religion that they practiced, but now it's a common feature of American culture, of European culture, and really throughout the world. Why? One explanation is that when the zombie movie, the first one, the Night of the Living Dead, really became popular, it plugged into fears that were sometimes somewhat new. The Vietnamese War was going on, and the civil rights movement was happening, and there was mass protests in the streets, etc. So the whole idea of a massive group of people who individually are not threatening at all, but as a huge mass of people are somewhat threatening, might have given rise to this fear of the mass, right? And another thing to look at is how the zombie movie, in particular, is also an apocalyptic movie, and that's another trend we see in our culture. Why are apocalyptic movies so hugely popular right now? There's a saying that it's easier for us to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. So, in some ways, is there something about the apocalypse that is desired? Is there something about zombies that is desirable? That we get to go on a shopping spree all the time, every day, and that there's a certain freedom in the apocalypse that we don't have in our daily lives. So that's one thought that's been put out there. It's also been put out there that most of us are increasingly powerless in this world. Even the powerful are not as popular as they once were in the age of kings and so forth. And under the apocalypse, suddenly everything you do would matter, right? If you're one of the last remaining people on Earth, then suddenly your actions matter and have value. So this might be some explanation for that. So I've went into a little bit of depth there to show kind of how this might work, as how different ideas of how we can use that cultural trend to interpret, in this case, American culture, but we could go to other places as well. Um, we could stay on that theme, vampires, and this sexy vampire in particular. Why is that such a common theme right now? And I'm going to kind of throw out a few others that I've got written down here. And again, one thing that really works well for this essay is to choose something that is to identify a social trend, right? We're not reflecting on the big ideas of something like, does God really exist? That's a philosophy paper. It's not a reflective essay. So we're looking for cultural trends that we can interpret in order to interpret culture, and that can be a, a, a culture in general, like U.S. culture in the year 2020. It can be skateboarding culture. It can be a subculture. It can be the culture of Lutherans in Colorado. You can narrow that as much as you want, and I encourage that sort of narrowing of audience in this paper. So some other ones. So again, the horror, the zombies, we could add to this idea of horror a theory. Sometimes in my in-class discussions, I mentioned Julia Kristeva, who has a theory of the abject, which is that we're all born out of another body, and in order to form ourselves as an individual, we have to learn a behavior to find what's inside of our bodies, or the body that we came from, in some way repulsive, right? And the example of this is, if I had a cup, um, there's a cup, in this case a pen holder, but if I were to spit inside this cup and tip it back and drink it, you would all be, I'm sure some of you are making faces right now as I as I do that. And yet all of us have literally swallow gallons of our own saliva every day. But the idea is, certain things, once they're out of our bodies, and we can think of even more repulsive things, once they're out of our bodies, they need to stay out, right? This is the abject. We abject those things out of ourselves to give a clear boundary between self and other, to shape ourselves as individuals in order to fit into society. And Kristeva argues that this is a movement away from our bond with the mother into the bond with the symbolic order of culture. So that's getting a little um, um, philosophical, but you can see how philosophy can work in this sort of reflective essay. So, some other trends that I think could make good reflective essays, and I'm not going to go into these with as much detail as the one I just did, but for example, social media. So, the question about social media, does that make it closer? We're all learning a lot about social media right now during the corona virus pandemic. So how has that shaped our culture? How does that shape you personally? Start there. Always start with the personal and work toward interpreting broader culture in general. But yeah, there's lots we can say about that. Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, and so on. But we could go further, and other technologies as well. Um, Things like texting. I'm old enough to remember when texting first came out, and it made no sense to me because it took forever to type out this one sentence. That was back in the days when you had to click like 3 times on the number one button to get a C and all this. You didn't have the auto fill in and that sort of thing. So it took forever. And one of the things I came to believe about texting is that the reason it caught on is because we don't really like to talk to each other, right? It creates a distance. It's easy to send someone a text um, and wait for a response. You don't really have to engage. I can send my mother a text and she can answer, and that's it. But I can also be doing other things that I want to do. I don't really have to be fully present with that other person. Um, so I think that's something we can take into that. Bullying and the effects of bullying today, particularly cyberbullying, and the impact of that. The Me Too movement. I just read recently, now Joe Biden has been accused of some things, although the Me Too movement hasn't really focused on that. Why? That's an interesting thing, maybe potentially. Um, uh, Sports issues such as steroids in sports, that might, what does this trend tell us about the world we live in? And also just the popularity of sports. Why, are sports so popular in our culture? Why do we know so much more about sports than we do, say, about politics, even though obviously politics probably shapes our lives a lot more than sports does? A lot of us are passionate about sports, but not so much about politics. And we don't know nearly as much. What does that say about the world we live in? The Starbucks phenomenon, online dating. Um, when I was young, if you put out like a personal ad, back then it was the newspaper, meant you were really rock bottom. You couldn't get any lower than that, right? But I think it's now quite socially acceptable and normalized to use online sources. In fact, I think it's probably the dominant way that most people meet, through those technologies. I forget some of the names on them. Is it better to meet people through these online sources? Or is it better to meet them at a bar? Or are they both bad? Or should there be another alternative? Um, um, in some ways, this online phenomenon seems very similar to shopping, right? I make myself into an advertisement, and that's my profile. And then I go shop and look at other people's advertisements and make my decisions based on that. Is that a good way to do things? So let me see. Comic book superheroes and the superhero phenomenon in movies. It used to be that only adolescent boys had any interest in superheroes. Today, mostly men, but a lot of women too, have a lot of interest in the superhero in Marvel and I'm blanking on the other one. Um, the superhero movie is the biggest franchise that we have in America today. Why? And this Comic Cons that are so popular, right? Is this because our culture is because some suddenly become more immature, or have superheroes evolved in such a way to? So that might be worth exploring. Gun violence and school shootings, things of this nature. Be careful on that one. If you want to argue, don't choose that. If you really know what you think, but it might be interesting to say, okay, for example, why is it? We know, for example, that workplace accidents kill 20 times more people than than gun shootings do. So why do we focus so much on these gun shootings? And it occurs to me that both sides, the right and the left, are very classist in the way they look at the gun issue, right? Right wingers say, I need my gun to protect myself from all the riffraff that's out there, right? And left wingers say, no, we need to take away guns so that riffraff doesn't kill people. In both sides, I see some very patronizing views that might be worth exploring, right? That has nothing to do with your opinion about gun control or anything like that. That's for another essay, but might be interesting in this one. The popularity of so-called gangster rap with the white middle class, that might be worth exploring. The hipster phenomenon of not taking anything seriously, being always ironic. Even politically, again, we don't want to argue in this essay. That can be a small component of it, but we really want to focus on reflecting. But the Trump and Sanders phenomenon. It looks. I know Sanders didn't get the nomination, but the fact that both of these people are seen, what rightly or not, they're seen as sort of outsider figures. Um, Transgender bathrooms, that could be an issue worth exploring. The sexualized Halloween costumes might be interesting, as well as the sort of increasing sexualization of very young girls in our culture. Um, and let's see, the police violence issue, which has always been an issue. You can go back and look at, say, Richard Pryor in the 1970s doing comedy routines about this. But in the day and age of cameras on all the phones, it's become where people are much more aware of this issue. And how has that changed us as a culture potentially? U.S. One of the things, I travel a lot. One of the things I notice is the U.S. It's people from the U.S. that have this sort of rite of passage that you leave home and you go away to college and you become an alcoholic for a few years or something, right? What's behind this sort of party culture of both the United States and Britain? Those are the two dominant ones, I would say. What does that speak to? And in large part, I would argue that it speaks to a sort of perverted individualism in our culture that is opposed to sort of a more responsible collectivism. Um, and body image issues, right? Body image is what's considered to be the ideal body changes all the time. What does that say about the culture, right? It used to be that pale complexion, kind of a little bit overweight, that was the most beautiful type of woman there could be, the so-called Rubenesque woman. And that was because that represented riches. That meant you had plenty to eat, and it also meant that you weren't outside working in the fields, getting sunburned and so on, getting your skin leathered from the sun. So, what is it today about the sort of thin, but muscular sort of body image that's dominant. And I think along with that, things like eating disorders, I think is another interesting thing to pursue. Eating disorders that now affect men is quite a bit as well. It's not, it used to be gendered and was mostly about women. Now both sexes experience this to a degree. Um, um, let's see. So, reality TV shows, um, the cheating phenomenon. I'm thinking about you New England Patriot fans with this one, and the normalized idea of cheating in some ways. Again, steroids can be brought into that. Um, so those are some thoughts that come to mind in terms of microaggressions and identity politics. Those are some others. So there are some topics. You don't have to choose one of those topics. If you could want to choose something else, that's fine. But your assignment is to choose a prospective topic. You can change this later, no problem. After our discussion, you might get a new idea, and that's fine. So just come up with a prospective topic. If you want, come up with two prospective topics, and you can do the same assignment with two topics instead of one. But using that one or two prospective topics, your assignment is as follows, and I'll post this in the announcements a little later. So number one, underneath this video, I want you to post 3 questions to ask the class about your topic. A few rules here. One, no questions that have yes or no answers, because we're looking for questions that will lead to reflection, that will lead to discussion, right? So if there's a yes or no answer to your question, don't ask it, right? Also, we don't want to include any questions that are asking people to share knowledge that's available on Google or something else, right? So don't ask, hey, what's the answer to this math problem, or what does E equals MC squared mean, or something like that, right? So we're asking questions that will solicit people's experiences, ideas, opinions, and so on, okay? So 3 questions. And then part 2 of this assignment is to do the discussion, is everyone has to respond to at least 6 of the questions that are put out there. That can be 3 questions from one student and 3 from another, or it can be 1 question for 6 different students, however you want to work it, but find questions that you think you've got an interesting reply to, and reply to those questions that way, okay? And then everyone should respond to at least 2 of the responses to their 3 questions, right? And then the idea is to utilize all that. And a lot of your topics will overlap. You'll see a lot of similarities, and you want to kind of let your essay wander. And for a reflection, just make sure you bring it back on focus at some point. So you could, in other words, hopefully for this discussion will give you ideas, not just from what people respond to your questions, but other topics and other questions hopefully will inform your topic as well. Okay, and that will be your that's our in-class assignment for this week, and this will be the last thing we do with the reflective essay. So I'll go ahead and give you your due date for the reflective essay, the rough drafts of your reflective essay, which will be due a week from Tuesday at midnight. I'll have to double check on the date. I think that's the 14th, but I'm not sure. Again, I'll post that in the announcements. So go ahead, and then, so yeah, so as far as due dates on this assignment, and again, I'll post this on announcements, but I want everyone to post their 3 questions by Tuesday at midnight, by tomorrow at midnight, and then by Friday at midnight, I want everyone to have done the second part, which is to respond to 6 questions and to 2 of your own. Okay, and you can do more than that if you'd like, and let me know if it's also fine too if you respond to 5 and not 6, if your responses are in depth and that sort of thing. So try not to think of this as busy work. I'm just going to say something. Try to actually really be as engaged as you can. That'll be more helpful, not only for your peers, but it'll help you more in coming up with a good topic and some good ideas for this essay anyway. So as always, send me an email using the the email that's on the syllabus, not the D2L email. If you have any questions, if it's not something we can resolve via email, I will give my phone number out, and we can arrange for a phone call. So hope you're all well and healthy and safe. And I know these are challenging times um, for students as well as teachers. So I'm going to try to be patient. I've noticed not many of you have posted yet, and you still had 5 minutes before I started this video for the last essay, the Kevin Carter essay, which is an example, which is a kind of a model for what we mean by reflection. So I'll be a little bit flexible. If you can get that in, sometime today, I can still give you credit. But do kind of don't try not to slack too much, even though these are weird circumstances we're dealing with. So all right, thanks everybody, and talk to you in the next video lecture, or if there is one. So thanks. Bye-bye.